This story in Luke 24 has all the great pieces to a great story. It has confusion, and it has sadness, it has sorrow, it has the time when they're starting to become this realization, light is dawning on to people, and then there's this absolute awareness and recognition of something new. Then there's this excitement, and then there's the action that takes place after this. If you want to know more about this story, we did a series on it called 7 Mile Miracle about a year ago, and you can find it on our website, because there's so many layers to this story. Story about two disciples who were leaving Jerusalem, heading to Emmaus. And as they headed to Emmaus, they were heading into the sunset. The sun was falling on them that day, and Cleopas and perhaps Mary were those two disciples. You saw a couple of disciples walking on a path earlier. That was a social distancing walk, mind you, and this is our road and our path of how we would walk, not looking at all like the path or the road that they would have taken from Jerusalem to Emmaus. But that was a 7-mile journey. It was after a long day's events, and they were trying to make their way. And once again, it was sunset. I think that's an important piece of this story, because as the sun was setting, it's kind of symbolic of what was going on. There was great discouragement, there was great despair, there was great frustration. All of their hopes and their dreams had kind of been dashed before them. Luke chapter 24, verse 17 says that while they were on the journey, a man kind of joined them, and we know it to be Jesus. The two disciples didn't know it was Jesus, and they got in this conversation, and Jesus asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" In verse 17 it says, "They stood still, their faces downcast." They were so discouraged. You can almost hear just how resigned they were. And then in verse 21 it goes on to say that, but as they discussed the events that had happened in Jerusalem the few days before, they said, but we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. See, they knew that Jesus had been crucified, and they shared that, but they were saying that they had hoped he would be the one to set things right, to put the people up on top so that they might be able to serve God with holiness and with peace and without fear, and that they would be free. That was their hope, and all of this was changed. Their hopes were dashed and their dreams were crushed. Maybe you and I can identify with this season of discouragement, this season of despair, as COVID has kind of wrecked any plans or habits that we have had. I hope that you'll have an opportunity to kind of discuss with each other and maybe post below some of the ways that you're experiencing discouragement. I know that for us and our family, all sorts of things have changed. We have experienced not only the change of school, but my son Ben was going to pick up lacrosse, and he had started with that. He had gotten all of the equipment, even the jersey, and yet not able to participate in that. Also for him, prom is no more, and graduation no more as well. Some of you all are experiencing how we are all shut in, and finally experiencing what it is to be like a shut-in. Everybody is a homeschooling teacher, and not all of us skilled to be teachers. Can I get an amen? And then there are others who are everybody who's experiencing the threat of a disease that could come into their lives, and there are those whose immune systems are compromised all the time. And we're just finally getting a little bit of experience of what they're experiencing all the time. I know that for us, we have experienced Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting, and I am all zoomed out and having a little bit of overdose there. We fill our dishwasher multiple times a day, and our grocery bill is at least twice what it was before. And we're not sure that once they release us back to freedom in real life, whether we'll be able to fit through the door again after all of the snacks. But businesses have been interrupted, people's vacations have been interrupted. There's a love-hate relationship with the people that you might be sharing space with. You're getting to share space with some of the people that you love the most. And yet some of you might be open to just kind of enjoying some time with people that you love a little less. Don't know. They're learning new skills and new roles. There's constant interruptions for those who are trying to work from home and also have young children around. You're doing it in a different place. You're not able to go to work. You're having to learn new styles of working. And some of you have even experienced the difficulty of not being able to be with your loved ones as they're dying. All challenges in life, all experiences of discouragement and disruption and disappointment and despair. And there is no shortage of it. In fact, as some of you all have heard recently, that extension of our isolation time may be even longer. And there's even concern that this disease might go away for a moment, but then come around kind of like a scorpion tail and hit us again in the fall. And that can be discouraging as well. So all of us, friends, are in a way walking towards sunset, blinded by the situation that is in front of us and all around us. So take a moment in a minute just to name and to discuss some of the discouragement or the sunset that you're experiencing in your life. And we'll give you just about a minute to do that with those who are in your home. Once the disciples made it to Emmaus, then there was this slight twist in the story. And Luke 24:29 puts it this way, says, "But they urged him strongly, 'Stay with us, for it's nearly evening, the day is almost over.' So he went in to stay with them." And this is where everything changes in the story that was read earlier. He goes in, and they have a meal and they continue to talk, and Jesus explains essentially that the situation is a lot different than what it seemed in the beginning. In fact, this man they found out was a lot different than what he seemed as well. And so as they invited Jesus into the moment, into their discouragement, into their frustration, he was able to take their perspective from what was kind of a short-term, very close, near view, and change it from one that was temporary view to a long-term perspective and to an eternal view. In fact, they said, when they were talking about Jesus and the events in Jerusalem, they were saying that they had crucified Jesus, and they had hoped that he would be the one to redeem Israel. But now Jesus was explaining to them that they had crucified Jesus, but he was the one who redeemed Israel. It was not that Jesus was going to save them from suffering, he was going to save them through suffering. And the whole perspective of what was going on in those days was changing for them completely. And so Luke 24:31 to 32 says, "Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, 'Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?'" See, Jesus at that time had gotten historical, he'd gotten biblical with them, he'd given them a whole different perspective and laid things out differently from what they had experienced. Have you ever felt like you are on the road to Emmaus, discouraged and frustrated? And the point here as we get to Emmaus and learn from this story is that we need to invite Jesus into that discouragement. And as we do, try to see the perspective from the perspective that Jesus would have us to experience. If we will invite Jesus in, then we can listen to his guidance and get a different understanding of our current disappointment, and perhaps our hearts will be warmed. The other thing that was fascinating was that these two disciples, that they were traveling together, and it's great to travel a long life's journey with friends and others who can bring perspective as well. We were not meant to journey this alone. And COVID-19 has affected us all, helped us to experience the implications are global, and it's spread across. The internal ramifications are pretty thorough as well. COVID-19's penetrated every part of society all around the globe, but it's reached every part of us as well. It's affected us physically, it's affected us mentally, it's affected us emotionally, it's affected us spiritually. We'll never be the same again as we were before. And whether we realize it or not, Jesus is traveling with us. And we need to invite him in and seek his guidance and seek his perspective, because he is one who understands pain, he understands suffering for sure. He is certainly worth listening to and offers a message of hope. So I hope that you'll take a moment just to simply name and discuss who helps bring perspective in your life. So then, after hearing that great news, the men started to walk towards Jerusalem, head back to Jerusalem, towards the sunrise. Sunrise being symbolic of hope being restored, hope being renewed, hope being revived, and because hope was dawning, all because of the resurrection. They had seen, they had experienced Jesus in his real presence. And they probably walked to Emmaus, but they ran back to Jerusalem. Those 7 miles, as hope just started building and growing more and more within them. Luke chapter 24, verse 33 and 34 says, "They got up and returned to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them assembled together, and saying, 'It is true, the Lord has risen, and he has appeared to Simon.'" I can only imagine what would have happened for them as that hope just started to erupt and overflow within them, that the news that they had heard was actually true and they had seen him with their own eyes. So this is the story that about what it means to be a Christian. And only with Jesus on our side are we able to really experience our hearts burning within and life as God intended it. I've heard many messages this past week, many from pastors that I've been listening to, all ones that try and offer hope. One saying that we need to starve our fear and feed our faith. I love that one. There was another person who said that they were trying to kind of hold in balance and tension their both grief of what was going on and their gratitude of a new perspective on life. Not either grief or gratitude, but holding them both and together. I also got a text from someone earlier this week about a Facebook post talking about how they wanted to appreciate life and that they hope things wouldn't return back to normal. That on the other side of this, that they would never take some of these things for granted. That when they drove their kids to school, that they would thank the teachers and they would thank all the people's helping with their children. That as they went to the doctor's office, they would appreciate it. If anybody ever wanted a hug for them, then they would make sure that they were are embracing that person. They would never take for granted going to the store and having things on the shelves. And that they would never take for granted being with people or going to a restaurant. What an awesome perspective on life, that their goal was to pray more and to love harder and to just journey into a new way of living beyond this time frame. Friends, what we do now will determine what we see when we look back later. And so we can decide today how we're going to live. We can decide whether we'll walk towards sunset, where there is despair and discouragement, walking towards Emmaus, or we can walk back towards Jerusalem, the sunrise, walking towards hope. It's our choice which we decide to do. I hope that you'll join me, and let's choose to walk towards hope.